Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, along with Vincent Turner, our co-host, our founder of 100 Yards. Brian LeBel is our producer and engineer today. And Vincent, we're going to talk about a guy, what an amazing life that he led. Nick Bouniconti, the middle linebacker that everybody recognizes from the Super Bowl years with the Miami Dolphins. He started as a Boston Patriot, went to the University of Notre Dame, but the early life, I don't know much about Vince when he was younger, Nick when he was younger, but I will tell you this, Vincent, that this is a guy that made such an amazing contribution, and his life and football intertwined together. One of the more interesting personalities that we've discussed.
Respect on his name. Very successful on the field. Went to one of the best schools in the country, actually the school that's the face of college football, Notre Dame University. Spent some years in Boston, then went over to Miami, won a Super Bowl under a great coach in Don Shula, and done a lot of great things after his playing days. That's what I remember about Nick Bouniconti. But most of all, how can we not talk about today? And I know you're going to hop on it hard. The undefeated Miami Dolphins, still the only undefeated team in the National Football League history. And it look like that record going to last forever. Back to you, Harp.
Well, there are many players, including the Mercury Morrises, the Larry Zonkas, and the Nick Bounicontis of the world that want to celebrate every time a team that gets close to that undefeated mark and lose the game. It took the New England Patriots up until the Super Bowl before they ended up losing their one and only loss of the season. That was a few years ago. But Nicholas Anthony Bouniconti, he was born on December 15th, 1940. He died on July 30th, 2019. He was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. His father, Nick Sr., and his mother is Pascalina. Her nickname was Patsy. Everyone called her that. So just off the Chicopee River there in Springfield, they were bakers. They had a store, third generation. Nick served his younger life there on numerous occasions. So whether he was kneading bread or whether or not he was actually putting the sugar on the cinnamon buns, that was the early part of his life. He grows up in Springfield, plays multiple sports, and ends up being good enough from the high school days to be able to go to the University of Notre Dame. And during his 4 years at Notre Dame, there wasn't a whole lot of highlights other than everybody all agrees that he led the team in tackles. His junior year was one of those first ones that he really was a standout. And that gives an opportunity for others to be able to see how good he is. The pro level is what I'm talking about. And the AFL didn't come into effect yet, but they were just getting started and they were thinking about it. And once they set in, Nick takes advantage of that by becoming a Boston Patriot out of Notre Dame. But his early life there, he was an All-American at Notre Dame. And his 1961 season was one of the better ones that he had. And now he starts to get the accolades. And I'll tell you, Vincent, his career at Notre Dame, even though I don't know a heck of a lot about it, was certainly a very impressive one. He looks a little bit too small. He looks a bit like he's a stumpy guy. But you know what? He would hit you. He'd hit you hard. And he was a leader of the defense.
Once again, I talk about these players that you cannot tell them what they can't do. Nick Bouniconti was one of those guys. But what I came impressed with, I'm going to step back, is that he went to Cathedral High School in Springfield, a prestigious high school where the NBA commissioner, Larry O'Brien, attended. That's saying something right there. But his time at Notre Dame, of course, they didn't win a lot. His senior year, they went 5-5, but he had a teammate that ended up being a pretty good quarterback in the AFL by the name of Daryl LaMonica.
Yep.
He was out. I think he's from Southern California, the same area you from, Hawk. But the thing that really surprised me is that his head coach at Notre Dame at the time told NFL scouts, I believe that Nicholas is too small to play in the league. I didn't understand that, but he proved us wrong. And I really didn't understand that because if you look at the 1961 All-American team, that he made first team was, think about all the stars that was on that team. Gary Collins, Cleveland Browns, Super Bowl champion out of Maryland. Billy Neighbors, Roll Tide out of Alabama. The great legendary Marilyn Olsen. Ernie Davis, James Saxon, the quarterback at Texas. Lance Allworth, Pig Sewell, University of Arkansas. And his head coach, who's seen him play day in and day out, says something about him like that. That's kind of crazy, but you see how it ended up. Back to you, Hawk.
5'11", maybe 215, 220 pounds. That's one of the reasons, Vincent, that we're just not sure. They didn't know. But he ends up being a 13th round selection by the Boston Patriots. And that's when you go into training camp, you're thinking, I don't even know if I'm going to get a locker, let alone a bed to sleep in at night at the dormitory, wherever they had their early practices. But grit, the determination, the stick-to-itiveness that Nick had, obviously, it made a tremendous impression. In 1962, the Boston Patriots, they were 9-4-1. They were coached by Mike Holloway, who ended up being there for quite a while. Gino Cappelletti, Fred Bruni, Tom Middleton, Jim Kolkoff, a couple of guys that, the early Patriot organization knew as their stars. And Nick makes the team and ends up starting and making a difference there. His ability to lead others and get them to play well, I think his smarts and his savvy, hey, you need to move over. We're an under, not an over. They switched. His ability to know what everybody else is supposed to do, I think really helped carry him and get a spot on the roster. And the 62 team I mentioned, they won 9 games. At 63, they were 7-6-1. They go to the playoffs for the first time in 1964. They were 10-3-1. Again, they're only playing 14 games. The one tie was on October 16th against the Raiders, and it was a 43-43 tie. Still to this day, the highest scoring tie in NFL history. But they lose to Buffalo. And remember, Jack Kemp was the quarterback of the Bills back in those days. They lost 24-14 in Fenway in front of a record 38,000 people. So a still small audience watching these AFL games. They were good again. They were second best in the East in 66. They were 8-4-2. And this is when the East consisted of the Bills, the Jets, the Oilers, the Dolphins, and then the Patriots. Those were the teams. 3-10 in 1967, 3-10-1, 4-10 in 1968. And then he gets traded from the Boston Patriots. They let him go, and he ends up with the Miami Dolphins. And that, to me, was a difference maker. This is the Dolphins, the second or third year that they're in existence there. George Wilson was the head coach. But, Vincent, all those days, I'm going to say, like Claude Humphrey, who we did a legend show on a little bit earlier, you're not on a great team, not with a great organization, but you learn how to play the game the right way, and good things can happen. Give me a thought or perspective that you might have regarding those early Patriot seasons that he had, establishing himself and really becoming a key spoke in the wheel of a defense.
Well, I'm going to go back to what his coach said at Notre Dame in senior season. I think Nicholas is too small, maybe not quick enough, but those years that you just described with him being with the Boston Patriots, I belong here. You're underestimating me. I got something in me that nobody understands. I could be a football player at this level, and I'm consistent. I'm a leader. I'm a winner. And most of all, it's the great movie, Warriors come out to play. And I'm a warrior at the highest level. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, 69, I said George Wilson is the coach there with Miami. They make a move after that. Don Shula is brought in. It's his first year as the Dolphin coach, and he had just come from Baltimore, and the Colts end up losing to the Jets in the Super Bowl, and that was a real difference maker for the league. You finally had the two leagues playing against one another. It was going to be a rout. The Colts were supposed to run away with this. This is one of the best Colt teams ever, and they lose to the Jets. This is the Joe Willie Namath where he holds the finger up at the end of the game. And he had said beforehand that we're going to win the game. I guarantee it. Well, the way he was saying it was just, look, we're going to be there. We're going to show up, and we're going out to win the game. And the press obviously took advantage of that. But because the Jets responded and they end up winning that game, I think that established Joe Willie Namath for the rest of his life as being one of those guys that was a difference maker. The point being is that after that game, renegotiating with the Rosenblum and the way that worked out, Don leaves. He's at the peak, and he ends up going to a new organization where the Robbies, who are running the show there, Joe Robbie, of course, is specifically the owner of the team, and he gives Don Shula the keys to the car and everything that was associated with that from a higher perspective. This is a great move for Don Shula. And before you know it, they were 3-10-1 in 1969, his first year there. Then they go 10-4. They lose to the Raiders in the playoffs that year. And then in 71, everything changed. And this is a 3-year reign where the Dolphins were the team to beat. And they go to the Super Bowl and lose. And that's the game against the Dallas Cowboys. Thank you, Brian, for those pictures. But Vincent, things were turning around with the organization. They were young. They were hungry. They were talented. They had Bob Greasy, Jim Kick, Mercury Morris, Larry Zonka, Larry Little on offense. Some great players. Norm Evans was a standout for them. I've met Norm before. They knew that something really amazing was going to happen there. And it finally does. They get to the Super Bowl. They lose badly. But from there on out, watch out, because here come the Dolphins.
That's something that when you look at Coach Shula and when he got with the Miami Dolphins organization, something about leadership. It's something about having the right pieces in place. Picking up Nick Bouniconti was kind of like that final piece of the defense. A guy that's played in the league for a long time, a guy that's seen a lot of schemes, a guy that had the hunger to win. Then getting Paul Warfield, bringing him over from Cleveland. Another guy that experienced winning 64 championship with the Browns, with the great Jim Brown. But most of all, to me, that made all this come together along with Nick Bouniconti was the guy that wore the glasses back then. A quiet guy out of one of the best engineering schools in the country, Purdue University, who we have talked about in the past, Mr. Bob Greasy. And you put that together, you're going to be very successful. And that's what happened to the Miami Dolphins. Everybody stood in their place. Everybody knew what they had to do. Everybody knew they had to win. And then they was in a beautiful environment down there in Miami. It can't get no better. And you bring a guy that talked a lot of smack at the time, who I saw play in college at West Texas State by the name of Mercury Morris. Couldn't get no better. Back to you, Harp.
Yeah. That Super Bowl loss that they had obviously changed some things, and the direction changed. And then they decided, I don't know if it was Nick himself, but they decided as an organization they were going to work a little bit harder and a little bit more precise. And next thing you have the 72 season, they beat everybody, including in the playoffs. Let me take a quick little look here. That 72 team, they were 14-0 in the regular season. They open up with Cleveland. They beat the Browns 20-14, not a blowout. Then they play on New Year's Eve against Pittsburgh. They have to go to Pittsburgh. There was a clause in the agreement factor back in those days where the team for the championship game alternated from year to year, kind of like the baseball All-Star game, where one year the NL hosts, the next year it's the AL that they host, and they just had a different way of organizing it. So they're undefeated, they're 15-0, and they've got to go to Pittsburgh and play in the cold there on New Year's Eve. They end up beating the Steelers 21-17 in a close game, and then they come out to Southern California. The picture there, both that Brian put up from that Super Bowl, it was probably 74 degrees, just a gorgeous day on January 14th. They get a week off. They win Super Bowl VII, 14-7. Again, a close game, but the defense, the no-name defense with Mervin Fernandez, with Jake Scott, with everybody else that was around that. And Nick Bouniconti, just another one of those guys that he wasn't a household name at the time, but guess what? He soon became one, because when you go in the playoffs and everybody's watching you, and then you make 15, 20 tackles a game, they're going to find out who you are. And that's one of the great successes that the Miami Dolphins, they end up with the perfect record, 17-0. And they say that Mercury Morris and whoever was with him would pop. And Nick Bouniconti is another one of those guys, right? Look how small he is compared to the other guys. Just a little dude, but he was a force. And they would pop the champagne whenever the team that has 10 or 11 or 12 wins. I believe Tony Dungy's Indianapolis Colts was one of the more recent ones where they go deep into the season. They're undefeated, and they go 14, 15-0, then they lose, and the champagne is popped. The Miami Dolphins get to celebrate because, again, they're the only team in the history of the league that had an undefeated season. The 73 team, they go 12-2. They end up beating Cincinnati 34-16. That's more of a blowout. Then they beat the Raiders 27-10. That's on December 30th. That's more of a blowout. And then on January 13th, they end up beating the Minnesota Dolphins. The Minnesota Vikings. The Dolphins win that one 24-7. Blowout in the playoffs. That 73 team, I think they were beating teams more convincingly. And so that 2-year reign that they had, absolutely fantastic. The 74 team, 11-3. They end up losing to the Raiders 28-26. That was in the Sea of Hands game. And it wasn't the end of the Dolphins, but it certainly was very difficult for them to establish anything more than 3 or 4 years of dominance. They certainly had that from 71 to 74. That was the team to beat in the National Football League. Congratulations to the Miami Dolphins. And obviously, Nick Bouniconti was a key component in all of that.
Go back to the undefeated season. The no-name defense, I believe, had 5 shutouts that year. But go back to the Super Bowl. There was a play in that game that set the tone for the no-name defense. Remember the interception Nick Bouniconti had in that football game?
Yeah, yep.
But you forgot to mention maybe 3 other outstanding players that's on the defense. How ironic today that we broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia, in the metro area. How we cannot be honored to give kudos to Jake Scott, go Dogs, and Mr. Bill Stanfield, go Dogs, and a young man who played corner. I believe he went to Texas Southern by the name of Lloyd Mumford. The Notre Dame defense. And think about this. They were so dominant that day. Really, if it wouldn't have been for Garo Upimian's stupid pass, they would have won in a shutout. Think about that. 2 minutes something to go in the game, and he just don't fall on the ball, and he throws an interception. Mike Bass takes it back for a touchdown, then becomes a game. It's 14-7 with about a minute something to go in the game. But to be honest, that's why we have these legend videos, because it's about greatness. It's about players that are great. Here we are sitting here in 2025 still talking about the Miami Dolphins, that 72 team being an undefeated team in National Football League history. And I would have thought it would have been several other teams that would have went undefeated. But we're still here today talking about that football team and talking about a great individual that set the tone. He's Italian, Mr. Nicholas Bouniconti. It don't get no better than that. And that was a great run with the Miami Dolphins. They didn't do nothing fancy. They played hard-nosed defense in those 3 years, and they ran the football. And they did it the right way. That's when football was punishing at the line of scrimmage. Back to you, Mr. Harper LeBel.
Yeah, you had to stop the run, and so Nick was in on just about every single tackle. 69, 70, and 73, he was the Miami Dolphins' most valuable player. So 3 times during his tenure while he was there. And he is the linebacker on their silver anniversary team. Obviously, Brian Cox and Zach Thomas and a host of others have played that position incredibly well over the years, but Nick was one of the first. He took advantage of his time while he was in Miami. He graduated with a GED degree from Suffolk University. So he's working on becoming an attorney. And he ended up being an agent for a little while after he was done. That's a neat thing right there. And he was representative for a number of different players. He also tried a bunch of other different activities. He was on the Comedy Channel. He was in light beer commercials. But really, most of us recognize him for his position there with Inside the NFL with Lenny Dawson. And by the way, in that 71 year where they went to the Super Bowl but lost, he and Lenny Dawson were in one of the greatest games that the NFL had ever had, the Dolphins and the Chiefs in that double overtime win. And Gary Yepremian, who you mentioned, kicks a field goal to help establish the Dolphins and really put them on the map. So his post career was amazing. But really, one of the things that we want to talk about, I'll go with you, Vincent, before we go to his son, Mark, just your comments on his ability to make something of himself after his NFL career was over.
Respect. Very successful. Got a law degree, represented a lot of baseball players, I believe. A guy that stayed in the spotlight, and be honest, a lot of people don't even really recognize him as being a Super Bowl champion. They recognize him as doing so much after his career. Very successful. Back to you, Harper.
Well, in 1985, his son Mark was playing at the Citadel and made a tackle. His head was down as opposed to being up, just enough to where it made a difference. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the tackle. It's just one of those horrible situations that can, and in this case, did occur for Mark Bouniconti. He ended up being a quadriplegic because of that. And so Nick decided at that time that he's going to do everything he can to try to raise funds. I'm wearing a shirt right here that is in the Bouniconti Fund, the foundation that they put together to try to stop paralysis and work on recovery methods with spinal cord injuries. And that became a huge part of his life. Working with players and really creating awareness for the CTE aspect of football, where Nick had some issues going on later on in his life. He decided to donate his brain to research after he died. Obviously, that decision was made while he was still alive, but it wasn't easy for him. He had some problems and the cognitive decline and everything that was associated with it that kind of kicked in very quickly after his success and his ability to project himself from a broadcasting standpoint. It wasn't easy. So kudos to his wife, to his family, to everybody else that was around. But we lost him on July 30th, 2019. So that's about 5.5 years ago, almost 6 years. So Vincent, there were a lot of interesting things about him and his life. But to sum it all up, he was a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He got to go 3 times. He was a Pro Bowler, team leader, an outstanding player. What else can you say?
When we think about Nick Bouniconti, what we're going to think about is the Miami Dolphins undefeated, playing at a prestigious school in Notre Dame and playing the game at a high level. And I know a lot of people, when we talk about the middle linebacker position, of course, you're going to mention Ray Lewis, Mike Singletary, Brian Urlacher. But when you look at overall, I always go on, do you have those coveted rings? Nick Bouniconti has 2. And you know, one of those rings is in the season that the Dolphins went undefeated. Let me say it one more time, undefeated. And what was that stat you just stated a few minutes ago, Harp, that he was voted MVP by the Dolphins? What years?
69, 70, and 73.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
The mic has dropped. Warriors come out to play. See, when you step on the football field, and I haven't played the game at a level like you have, Mr. LeBel, but I know this. When that person gets on the field that's special and that's great, there's nothing in their way. They already know they're great. They already been there. And their ability to have that leadership in them and an ability to say, I'm going to win every play. That's why the great ones, we talk about them all the time, AKA Tom Brady, a.k.a. Patrick Mahomes, a.k.a. Troy Aikman. See, I know a lot of people going to say, and I love Ray Lewis as a football player now. I love Mike Singletary as a football player. But when you talk about champions and putting on rings, there's a lot of people that love Nick Bouniconti too, because of the Miami Dolphins, the no-name defense. Back to you, Mr. Harper LeBel.
Well, he was an All-American at Notre Dame. He was an All-Star for the Boston Patriots. He's on the All-AFL, the all-time AFL listing. Goes to Miami, wins 2 Super Bowls, goes to the Pro Bowl twice. He's a second-team All-Pro 2 times, 6-time AFL All-Star. He's in the Boston Patriots All-1960s team, the New England Patriots 35th and 50th anniversary team. For obvious reasons, the Miami Dolphins, he's in the honor roll. So he's one of the greatest and most appreciated Dolphins of all time. Dolphins Walk of Fame, that was in 2011, and he became a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, as the picture you see there, as well as many other accolades for Nicholas Bouniconti. He was born on December 15th, 1940. He passed on July 30th, 2019, and we salute and honor Nick Bouniconti for his contribution to high school, to college, and professional football. What an amazing job. So thanks, Nick, for all that you did to make the game better than what it was. So for Vincent Turner, for Brian LeBel, I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you very much for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. This has been our Legend Show. We appreciate you watching. We just want to say thank you for being a part of the show, and have a fantastic rest of your day.